Hello, Cleveland, and welcome back to another edition of the 1085 Gridiron Podcast. I am Jack McCurry of thedogland.com, and joining me on this episode is a contributor, a great analyst over at the Dogland as well. It's Mr. Jack Duffin. Jack, how's everything going, bud?
I'm good. We're getting nearer. The nearer we get to the NFL season, all I need in life is an NFL season and some non-league football, as you guys would call it, soccer. Once that's happening every Saturday, every Sunday, my life's complete. I'll stay up and watch all the games midweek for the NFL. So I can't wait. That's all I need. And then everything's great.
Yeah, I mean, today's usually a happy day for football fans. Today is technically the first day of training camp. Obviously, training camp and the leading up to the season is a bit different, and we're going to touch that on today's episode. But before we get to that, let's talk about some other news going on in the NFL. There was a blockbuster trade over the weekend that we haven't even got to discuss yet. Jamal Adams, I mean, if you were living under a rock, you did realize he did not want to be with the New York Jets anymore. It was apparent that, while they said they were going to make him a Jet for life, contract negotiations were not going anywhere. He had requested a trade about a month ago, and they finally were able to come together with a team for a deal. He's going to the Seattle Seahawks. What a hefty price tag for him. The Seahawks gave up 2 number 1 picks. I think it was also a 3rd-round pick. They sent a 4th, or they received a 4th back from the Jets, and they also sent safety Bradley McDougall. Quite a hefty price, but Jack, over the last couple of years, Khalil Mack, Jalen Ramsey, Laramie Tunsil, and now Jamal Adams, non-quarterbacks are being traded for multiple first-round picks. And when I look at it, I see it as a great deal for both sides. I know your stance a little bit, and I'll let you have your opinion here in a minute. But when I look at it from the Jets, the fact that they got 2 number 1s for a safety was ridiculous. I was shocked when I seen what they got back in return, but now they can continue to build around Sam Darnold the next couple years if they think he's the guy. They also have additional draft assets to where if Darnold flames out, they got extra picks now to where they can move up and get a quarterback here the next couple years if they so choose. But then I look at Seattle. They had a great defense a few years ago when they won a Super Bowl. They let Chancellor retired. They let Earl Thomas walk. They let Sherman walk. And now they're starting to rebuild that defense again now that Russell Wilson's contract's in place. And I feel like getting Jamal Adams, especially considering he's only making $3.5 million for them this year because the Jets have to take on the bonus. And then they have him on the 5th-year option next year. Obviously, I think they're going to re-sign him at some point. But to have him really cheap for 2 years while you're continuing to rebuild that defense, it puts Seattle right back in the Super Bowl conversation. But as long as they have Russell Wilson and he's healthy, they will be in the Super Bowl conversation.
Yeah, the Seattle Seahawks are in the Super Bowl conversation because they've got the 2nd best quarterback in the NFL. Safety is a very important position. PFF ranks it as his 3rd most valuable when it comes to WAR. But it's also a position that is abundant every single year in free agency. And if you're the Seattle Seahawks and you really want to pay a safety, why didn't you just pay Earl Thomas? It really isn't that hard. They could have paid him, saved their 2 first-round picks. The rest is pretty much a wash, but 2 first-round picks for the difference of Earl Thomas to Jamal Adams. It just makes no sense to me. So I think it's just bizarre. If they really wanted a safety, by all means go invest. You'll never hear me going, safety, don't invest in those. 100%, great investment. But you don't need to give up picks. Never for that position picks. If you look at, Laramie Tunsil, you don't see great left tackles available in free agency. Top edge defenders, you don't see them in free agency. We've got Clowney, but there's the injury risk. That's the only reason he's there. So they're 2 positions where you don't get that option in free agency. So, I'd argue you draft them anyway, but you can see a trade that there's no other way to fix it. Safety is pretty much, I think, unique in the NFL for just how many are available every single year. There is always great talent. And the fact that you have to pay twice, you pay with the picks, and then you have to pay him a record contract. The fact that no contract is done is silly. because even if you don't want to pay anything for those first 2 years, do a Mahomes deal and you push everything into the first new year of the deal, perfectly fine. But get that deal done, because the issue is Jamal Adams, if he turns around and goes, I want 22.5 million a year. I said I wanted 17.5. I want 22.5 now. They have to pay that, because they're not going to allow him to walk in free agency. Yeah, obviously they can tag him twice and he can sit there and keep churning over that and then get paid again. But it's just silly as a team that you have that deal done when you trade for a guy, because if you can't agree that deal, don't trade for them and put the force back on him. If Jamal Adams was the one that bulldozed his own way out of the Jets and stopped the deal happening because he couldn't agree to a contract, then he looks like an idiot, and it flips that whole conversation. And the last part is, all the data says star power on defense doesn't really matter. And if that's where the world's at and it's about spreading and having lots of talent, why give up that much for just one player? If Seattle really wanted to win more, not only get more Russell Wilson more involved, just let him throw the ball. It's nuts, the amount of running they do, the fact that they use 3 linebackers and 4 DBs. There's so much great stuff they could do. Russell Wilson is the only thing keeping that front office employed in Seattle. And the Jets, amazing work. I am really, really excited for the Jets over the next few years. I think they're in a really good position. They've made some smart moves. They need to get rid of some players like Bell, but that will happen. And they'll get rid of Gase. In a year's time, I think that is going to be an exciting franchise people will want to get involved in and move forward. And I'm excited for who their next head coach is going to be in 12 months' time.
Yeah, definitely. Adam Gase is not the long-term solution at head coach for them, but Joe Douglas has made some good moves. If he can get out of Bell's contract in any way, then he might win Executive of the Year at this point. But with Seattle, you look at their trade history, and I wrote about this over the weekend. John Schneider and Pete Carroll are not afraid to give up multiple top draft choices. They did it with Percy Harvin. It obviously didn't work. Jimmy Graham, it was okay. And then they gave up a high pick for Sheldon Richardson. He left after a year. And they traded a high pick for Clowney. I think it was a 3rd-round pick. He's obviously still on the market. And then now they did this with Adams. They've built the team how they see fit. And you look at their 1st-round pick history, hasn't been the greatest either. So Seattle, while they don't get criticized enough, and maybe they should, they obviously have done the right thing, because since John Schneider and Pete Carroll have come to Seattle, the results are there. They've been to the Super Bowl twice. They're a perennial playoff contender every single year. They might not look the smartest on paper, but at the end of the day, they're winning. And that says a lot more than anything.
Yeah, but it all comes down to, and it's the article I wrote on the Dogland a few months ago. It's about having that quarterback. Having a top 10 quarterback is amazing and where you want to be. If you've got that top sort of 3, top 5 quarterback that is consistently amazing, you're in a phenomenal position where you can do lots of stupid stuff and you are still right up there. And the fact that they just do everything they can to stop themselves winning. It is a bizarre place to be. Seahawks Analytics Twitter is probably one of the funniest things you'll see. They're in a meltdown all the time when they're playing, because they're sitting there going, this is going to be an easy win. And then they actively try and hurt themselves every single drive. And it's bizarre. But if you can find a quarterback like that, and this is why I say you always just keep going until you find the guy. And if you get the guy that is Russell Wilson, is Patrick Mahomes, is Drew Brees has got into that conversation, Brady was in that conversation, you are in a phenomenal position where you're really likely to make the playoffs. Once you make the playoffs, it's all a load of luck. Luck's a massive factor once you get there, but you've just got to get to the playoffs every year, and having a stud quarterback does that for you.
No doubt about it. Hopefully, the Browns had their stud quarterback, and we could talk about being a perennial playoff team here soon. On Friday, the players union and the league came to agreement on a new, revised collective bargaining agreement to put all the safety and health protocol in place to start training camp on time and all that. One of the things is they gave the players the option to opt out and not play. And by doing so, they're still paying these players too. Not obviously the millions that they normally get, but they are paying them a fairly good amount of money. If they have a high risk condition, like if they have some health risk that would prevent them from playing just because they do not want to get coronavirus, they are paying them $350,000 for the season, but also an accrued season. So it does toll over towards next season. But if they're without risk, they get $150,000. I mean, I think that's completely fair for any player. Obviously, they're still making a lot more money than the average American. So the fact that teams and the league are still going to take care of these players if they choose to opt out, I think that's a good step in the direction for the league and to make sure that these players are still able to take care of their families as well as themselves.
Yeah, I think there might be some players out there that make the smart business decision to opt out for a year, and that's not necessarily to do with COVID. It's the physical toll playing those games and that whole season has on your body. And if you can take a year out and say you were due 3 million, you're going to get paid 150,000 this year, and then that 3 million you were due, take the 150,000 out, you get the rest of that next year, and suddenly you come back in a much better shape. You're able to go and compete, and potentially that adds 2 more years onto your playing career. Then you've definitely made the right move. So I think it could be an interesting one where there might be some players actually do this, and for whatever reason a player opts out, then there might be some that make the smart business decision as well, and I couldn't blame them for that, because you have a very, very short career in the NFL. Is it 2.4 years? It's something nuts like that. So if you think you can potentially add 2 more years as sort of that middle veteran roster guy, then you're in a great position. As well, you're going to see loads of that middle tier of a roster cut next year. If you had no guarantees next year, you're potentially going from someone earning 3 million to someone earning 1 million or less as sort of the veteran minimum. If you push 2 million of guarantees straight into next year, then suddenly you're not getting cut. And then that means you're going to get paid next year, whereas you might have been on a pittance in NFL terms. So I think there might be some smart business decisions. Obviously, they've capped it at 7 days. So sort of by the end of the weekend, we should know anyone, if they're opting out, these are the players opting out. And teams aren't really going to be able to take that money and go out and spend it on other players, like some people have rumoured, because they need that money next year. So anyone opting out actually probably helps the owners, helps the teams, helps the other players spread that money and move it into next year to sort of deal with that lower salary cap.
And there has been some notable players that have opted out. There was just a new one reported by Adam Schefter while we're recording. Bills defensive tackle star Lotulelei has opted out. Among the others, Laurent Duvernay-Tariff, the Kansas City offensive guard, who is actually a medical doctor, and he's working in a long-term healthcare facility up in Canada, and he's going to continue to work there during the pandemic. So kudos to him. I mean, he's putting his life on the line just like he does on Sundays. He, helping the elderly up in Canada. That's great by him. I think the Patriots have the most. I've seen, 6 of their players opted out. The most notable ones: offensive tackle Marcus Cannon, safety Patrick Chung, and linebacker Dante Hightower. And the other notable I did see was Minnesota defensive tackle Michael Pierce, who just signed with them in the offseason. So all those guys are among the high-profile names that are not playing. Also added to the CBA was a COVID reserve list. So if you test positive for the coronavirus, or you are around someone who may have had it, you're being placed on this list. There's been many players placed on this, including 2 Cleveland Browns, and there are only 2 Browns as of this recording. Running back Dontrell Hilliard and undrafted rookie Javante Moffitt. So what that means is they have to have 2 negative tests, and then if they have 2 negative tests, or whenever their quarantine's up, then they get activated off that list and they go back to the regular roster. But I don't even think they're allowed to report at this point. I think they have to test wherever they're at currently, or once they're done quarantining, then they have to come and have 2 negative tests. So, Hilliard obviously was competing for the 3rd running back spot, and Javante Moffitt, I mean, you're already in a hole because, limited on-field time, no preseason games. Like if you're an undrafted rookie, you're in a tough spot as it is. And now the fact that he has to quarantine, the hole just gets deeper for an undrafted rookie like Moffitt.
Yeah, there's lots of... It's going to be an interesting season because the chances for UDFAs to make the roster went through the floor. The fact there's no preseason games, short training camp, no rookie minicamp. So they had a lot less opportunities there. But the weird thing is going to be there's going to be a lot more opportunities down the line. If you can get yourself onto a practice squad, you're going to see things happen during the season where extra players will get elevated and things will happen. So it's going to be a weird one where there's less chance to make the roster, but there's more chance to have an impact in the NFL. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. Obviously, one of the other people to opt out for the year is Danny Vitale, who used to play for the Browns, fullback, and now with the Patriots. There's questions over, are the Patriots just having a massive tank? And I wouldn't put it past Bill. At the end of the day, it's the smart move to make. They're not going to win anything this year. So put yourself in the best position to draft a fantastic quarterback. If Cam doesn't turn out to be the guy, obviously if Cam turns out to be the guy, happy days. And then it's just going to be interesting. I think the other name out there, the Bears defensive tackle.
Eddie Goldman.
Yeah. So there's a few names. Obviously, yeah, these players are going to drop on. They're going to come back. The one thing is, it's been agreed between the NFLPA and the league. It's never going to be announced if these players actually test positive. It's only a chance that they're exposed to COVID or been around someone else that had it. So we don't actually know if Hilliard's actually had a negative test. Had a positive test, that he's got it. It's just one that these players will drop in, drop out. I think when the league gets going, you get 3 weeks to get back onto the active list, or you go to IR for the rest of the season. So we're going to see loads of stuff moving around, and it's going to be one that's going to be intriguing to see how it all plays out. But the fact that in the next 2, 3, 4 days, we'll know everyone that's opted out will then allow teams to start properly planning for the season ahead.
Yeah, and actually, I'm glad you brought that up because they also shrunk the roster sizes down from 90 to 80. And correct me if I'm wrong, you can split them up into like 2 intra squads and have until August 12th, I think, once they start practicing, which we're obviously going to get into the training camp schedule. Or you can go ahead and cut them down from 90 to 80. It's something to that effect, if I'm right.
Yeah, it seems like some weird rule if you can take sort of quarterbacks, rookies, and is it year 1 players, and then have a pool, and then you have everyone else. And I think the general theme seems to be cut to 80. That's happened with most teams.
Yeah.
I don't know, in a way, for that first sort of time, you couldn't just split into offense and defense and just sort of do that. That seems like more sensible. But in all honesty, you've got what? You've got 53 players. You've got 10 make the practice squad. So that's 63. I can sit here and tell you there's already about 15 players on that Browns roster in the 90 that are just they're never going to make the roster. And yeah, they might make a practice squad, but in all honesty, let's just trim that right down. So I think it's not a bad move. But I would like to see the NFL. I don't think they will. The agreement would have been done, but just almost create a 53rd team. Not 53rd team, a 33rd team. And just stick a load of players together training in a bubble. So have a bubble of basically 3, 4 players for each position and get them guys training together. So have almost like a super practice squad that you can just start pulling them guys out. Because I think that would have really helped that when people go down, have these guys in a bubble, have them paid, and then teams can just go and grab them.
Yeah, that would make a lot of sense. I mean, that's what Major League Baseball is doing. They have a team full of free agents down in Nashville, and I think they're quarantined. And then, if an injury were to happen, they do have sort of a practice squad, which is like 20 miles from the home city. Like for Cleveland, for instance, it's in East Lake, which is, I think, 20 miles to the east of Cleveland, obviously. But they do have the free agents, so if they don't want to bring any of their minor league prospects up because their service time and all that is really complicated, but they can go ahead and sign a potential free agent, a guy that's ready, could come in and make an instant contribution to the team. So that's actually a good idea. I'm wondering if the league has considered that. All right, let's talk about this training camp schedule because obviously there's no preseason games. Training camp's not open to the public, and it's all been minimized to like a 45-day schedule now. So where I think essentially that all the teams are pretty much getting ready for week one. And I feel like for Barry and Stefanski, they probably already had their 53-man roster settled, and the rest of the guys are probably auditioning for a potential practice squad because that's also expanded to, I think, 16 players. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jack.
Yep. So we're on 16 players this year for the practice squad. Their plans were to go there. I think it was going to be 12 this year, 14 next year, and 16 the year after. But they just went, hey, let's go all the way to 16. Let's get it done now.
Yeah, and that makes sense, obviously, with everything going on. But what the schedule breaks down is now these first few days, it's just COVID testing. That's the first 4 days of camp are COVID testing. I think they're bringing out everyone in a little bit at a time. They don't want to have all 90 guys come to the facility at once because that's a recipe for a disaster, let's be honest. After that, there's 2 days of players getting their physicals and equipment being distributed. Then they don't hit the field until August 12th. So in the meantime, from August 3rd to August 11th, they're spending an hour in the weight room and an hour on the field conditioning. The groups are no larger than 15. They're not doing the usual conditioning tests that they do at the beginning of training camp. And then they're going to have 4 days where they do start going out on the field and having practices, no pads. They just wear the shells, the practice uniform. After a couple of days, then helmets will go on. And then from the August 17th to September 6th, they're going to have padded practices, but they're only having a maximum of 14 padded practices. So that's in a 20-day period. They're going to have a maximum of 14 padded practices, which I think that's fair. Then you don't have to do them 14 straight. You can divvy them up every couple days and have an off day where it's just like a walkthrough. Jack, when you look at how the training camp schedule is set up by the league and the players union, could you see this becoming the norm, or do you think the league is still going to want to have preseason games? Because if there's money to be made, obviously the league and the 32 owners are still going to try to get every penny possible.
Yeah, I think we're still going to have preseason games moving forward. Will it be 4? Probably not. They've become a bit of a farce because you get 1 or 2 drives of the first team and then that's it anyway. So it makes sense to have them because it gives opportunities for some of the other guys to sort of jump in there and see what they can do in sort of a real environment. But how can you really judge your third line O-line against their third line D-line? Because if you start sacking the quarterback every snap, it's like, oh, that's great. I forget who the guy was last off-season. Browns fans were going wild for. I think it was it Lawrence or someone? And it was like, this guy's useless. And everyone's like, oh, but he got 3 sacks. And it's like, yeah, against the... It's like a revolving door, the third line offensive tackle. It's like you can't judge him against that guy. If he goes out there and does it against like Ryan Ramczyk, David Bakhtiari or someone like that, then I'm like, whoa, this guy has really got it. But yeah, against Joe Bloggs, who's never going to ever get a snap or a jersey number in the NFL, it's like, it doesn't really matter. So I think they'll go down. I think it will probably start part of the compromise for going to 17 games. Personally, I think it'd be really good if they did more sort of joint practices every year, maybe mandate that and say, hey, let's do 32 joint practices. We're going to go down to 3 games or even 2 games, and we'll put in 2 joint practices so you guys can get stuck in there. I think that would be quite a useful change because the teams seem to benefit more from them, and then you get the trade-off of stuff still going on. But yeah, you're going to want, how do you bring in the money? And that's the important number, because more money means more money for the owners, but that 50% is going as well to the players. So they do want the league making more money as well.
Yeah. While you were talking, 2 things. The Browns are actually going to live stream training camp and give you like a behind the scenes look to the fans. So that's going to be cool. And also first padded practice will be August 17th. Their first practice is August 14th. So they're generally only going to get a month worth of practices in. Like I said, I feel like they're going to have this roster in mind finalized probably by the time August 14th rolls around. And then they're just going to be in full-on preparation mode for Baltimore week 1. Because they can't really, like you said, they can't talk about, oh, well, this guy's doing really well in drills, but he's a third-string offensive lineman against a third-string defensive lineman. Like Chad Thomas, if he's blowing up Drew Forbes, no one's going to get excited. A, because we won't see it. B, because it really doesn't matter because Chad Thomas is a bad defensive lineman and he's probably going to get cut. So
he might be a bad DL, but he's a great DJ.
That's good. Yeah, he can go make his beats, and he'll be home for Labor Day down in Miami, so he'll be able to party it up with everybody else down there. So, but I like the way that they're doing this, and like the one key thing, they have to have an off day every 7 days, which is normal. That's been always the same thing. It's been Tuesday, but I guess it's however Stefanski and Barry want to implement that. And then coming off an off day, they can't increase or decrease time. So they can start at a 90-minute practice, and then they have an off day. They come back and have a 90-minute practice after that. So they can't increase time or reduce time. Like, there's a limit to what they can do. So I like how they're formulating everything, how the league and the players union agreed to everything. I think it's precise, but I agree with you. I don't see them abolishing all the preseason games. They might have one, maybe two. I do like the joint scrimmage idea. It's been fun the last couple of years with the Bills. They were supposed to do it with the Packers this year, unfortunately, because of everything going on. That's not going to happen. And then last year with the Colts, got to see some brawling. I think people finally kind of seen what Freddie Kitchens was all about because of that practice. But it's always good to see how our teams stack up against the other teams around the league. So hopefully the joint practices stick around once we ever get back to normal.
One day we will.
Lord, I hope so, buddy. Sometimes I wonder, especially over here in America, what's going on. One final thing, and you wrote about this over at the Dogland, was the talk about the salary cap potentially decreasing. It's probably going to decrease. It's just not clear how far it's going to drop. The league proposed the cap floor at $175 million. It can't go lower than that. I know the projections prior to the pandemic had the cap going up from $198 million to $210 million for next year. Barring something completely unforeseen, I don't see the cap rising at all. I do expect it to drop. It's just a matter of how far it's going to drop. You did write about this, and you talked about what it could mean for the Browns. First of all, like, do you think it's going to drop all the way to 175, or do you think the league will work something to where it won't take such a significant drop just because so many teams are in cap trouble as it is?
I think it's definitely going down to 175. There's the chance if the numbers look better that it won't go that far. I think they're talking somewhere between 80 and 90 million pound loss and $1 million loss. I believe that's in terms of the salary cap part. So it's actually probably double that per team. So if you're looking at 80 million, if you're covering 30 million of that by moving from 210 down to 175, so that's 35 of it done. And there's potentially going to be another 45 million of that to split over the next 3 years after that. Maybe it's just sort of 10 million each year. Quite how they work that out, who knows? I don't think that's been finalised, how sort of they split it over those years. But the Browns are in a really good spot. Yes, with everything going on in the world, it's horrendous, blah, blah, blah. But where the Browns actually are in terms of cap numbers is really, really solid for 2021. There's a few reasons why. We've obviously still got the Sashi cap rollover, so that's still sat there. I'd expect, based on sort of after this year, down to about 28.1 million left of that, because we've still got the Myles Garrett deal to add. I've just allotted 5 million of additional moves because, hey, some stuff's going to happen. They're going to sign some players. You're going to have some players hit COVID. You'll have to replace them with someone else, etc. So, yeah, about 28 is probably where we are, but it might be 25, it might be 30. Expect some movement. In terms of next year, we've got 35 players locked in that are really likely to make the roster. We've got 10 draft picks, and that is a really, really good thing to have. So the fact that we've got all these extra draft picks is great because they're cheap. And then that's cheap players you're loading in on, which means that middle of the roster that you're really going to struggle with, you can just load in there. So we're in a nice position. Where we do with numbers, you've got Richardson is gone. This is his final year with the Browns. He's due 16.7 million next year. You can cut him for 1.7 million dead. So you're saving 15 million here. So he's gone. The other one that's definitely gone next year is Chris Hubbard. That's a saving of 3 million. Doesn't really save you much, but you just do that anyway. Njoku's the interesting one of what do you do with him. Obviously, if he definitely wants to go, it's only 5.3 million of cap space. But if you've got sort of Bryant playing well, maybe you make that move and go, look, we may as well just save these 5 million, get something back. But the two big names on what you do with them is Landry and Beckham. Even before COVID, I'd been discussing, look, one of these two is probably in their final year. So it's what do they do? Do they move on from one? The other direction they could go is they could try do extensions with both of them. Maybe not adding on extra years, but pushing that cap down the line. Whereas you've got Beckham's due to be on 15.75 million. Landry's based on 14.8. So say they're roughly on 15 million each next year. Go, look, we're going to take you guys down to 5 million each next year. And for that, we're going to add 5 million onto your 2022 cap, 5 million onto your 2023 cap each. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to throw in a load of guarantees because they're both really light on guarantees after this year. Beckham's got none. Landry's got 3 million. And that might be the solution that they go with them two guys. They're going to need to do something. So there's some interesting directions of do they push it down the line? How do they work around that? But the advantage is the Browns are in a really, really good position numbers-wise. You've got some teams like the Eagles, like the Saints that are absolutely loaded. And the players that are going to struggle, they're not the rookies. The rookies are all on slotted contracts. Their numbers aren't going anywhere, and they're really cheap. You're not going to see it with the top players, the top quarterbacks, the top superstars. They're all still getting paid. What's going to happen is that middle of the roster, those players on sort of that 3 to 7 million a year, lots of them are going to get either cut or they're going to drop down to sort of earning 2-3 million a year where they were earning double that. And then they're not going to sign long-term deals. So don't think you're going to get some long-term benefit out of jumping on these players. You're going to get a short-term benefit. These players are just going to take a cheap one-year deal. So if the Browns have got cap space, you might be sitting there looking at free agents this year going, I really wish we had that guy. He signed a 1-2 year, 8 million a year deal. And then suddenly you can snap him up for 2-3 million next year. That's going to be great. And packing out that middle of the roster when you're looking to replace starters, that is going to be something that there's going to be a big opportunity for the Browns. So we're in a great position. Need to be smart. Don't get overexcited that you've got this 35 million in cap space there at the moment, because some money that's going to Garrett. You've got big extensions. You've got Baker. You've got Ward. You've also got to make a decision on Chubb. You've got these deals that you've got to address. So there'll be some small moves, but don't expect anything rash from the Browns. Let's keep that space and let's have a field day next year. You're also going to have 2022, might be a slightly lower cap, but I would expect it to be around the salary cap we have this year. So even if it's 198 million, that's going to be a big jump up from your 175.
I mean, you pretty much have been talking about these moves for months, though. Like the Richardson, the Beckham, and Landry. Like, you've been setting people up for this already. I mean, this is kind of just the final, like, this is probably going to happen. Maybe they'll finally listen to you one day, Jack.
Well, it's one that I've been talking about all these moves as their options the Browns should take because, hey, they can go find a free agent that's better than Richardson, that's going to cost less than 15 million a year. So you make that smart move. Where lots of Browns fans, they'll see that big salary cap number and be like, hey, we've got all this space. And it's like, well, actually, we're going to probably overspend the salary cap for the third year running. So it's like, we're actually, if you were doing your monthly bills and you start overpaying every single month, spending more than you're bringing in, you're sitting there thinking, I've got to change something. I'm doing it. It can't last forever. I can't live off my savings account for the rest of my life because unless you're minted, it always runs out. And that's something that you would do as a normal person. It's like, well, the Browns are doing exactly the same thing. They're living out that savings account and they're overspending their monthly bill every single year. So these things are happening. Once you get closer to that number and you obviously get like what the Saints do, what the Eagles do of being right up against that cap, keep pushing into next year. The Saints do it a lot more extreme way because, hey, their franchise is about to end its golden era. Drew Brees will retire and they will be stuck for probably 2 years where they're just trying to get that roster together because there's going to be no deal for their next rookie because they've still got to pay Drew Brees for 2 years after Drew Brees is gone. It's all going to land on 1 year, but they're going to have to move other guys around to sort of cover for that. So, yeah, I've been talking about these moves, but when the numbers really come to push, and I think 2022 is when people start being like, actually, that ginger kid, he might have had a point. But we'll see when that comes.
2 players you didn't mention, and I'm looking at your article again, J.C. Tretter and Joel Bitonio. I'm looking at over the cap now as well. Tretter, he's projected dead, or he's got a cap number of $11 million. If they cut him, that's $3.2 million. It goes against the dead cap. Joel Bitonio, he has a $10 million cap hit, but he has no dead money at all. So the Browns could cut him, boom, it would be gone. I think he just entered his 30s, so he's still got a couple good years left. The Browns may look to restructure his contract or extend it next offseason too. So, there is going to be a lot of difficult decisions ahead for this front office because you want to keep Baker happy, but you may have to get rid of a lineman, get rid of a receiver. There's also the Nick Chubb thing. Like, you want to keep Baker happy, but you also got to make sacrifices for the team as well.
Yeah, they're 2 great names to bring up, along with Beckham and Landry. They're sort of the 4 players that if you were going to do stuff with their contracts, it makes the most sense. Running low on guarantees. And that a player wants guarantees. So they might not be moves that wait till next year to do. They might all be moves and stuff that happens this year. Obviously, the slight difference with Bitonio and Tretter is you know what you've got. There hasn't been sort of the ups and downs that you get with those wide receivers. So it's a safer bet to go, right, let's change the way your contract. Let's sort of cut it 4 million this year, 4 million next year, push it further down the line, maybe add an extra contract year. So there's stuff to certainly keep in mind. Obviously, anytime you've got sort of that 10 million, you can turn that into sort of a 10 million signing bonus and do 2 million over the next 5 years. So there is options and stuff to move around. But Bitonio and Tretter, obviously, if you want to keep them long term, maybe Forbes really impresses across the season and they go, actually, Bitonio, your time's done here. We think we can get 90% out of Forbes. So that's one to possibly keep an eye on as well, because if any of these rookies or UDFAs or younger guys, when they get a chance because someone's ill, come in and do really well, then they're going to be sitting there and going, if I can get 90% and I'm going to save 7, 8, 9 million, you're doing it. It's like these veterans they potentially go off for 2 weeks because they get COVID. They might never come back to the same cushy starting gig that they had. So that's going to be an interesting one to watch through the season.
Absolutely. If anybody hasn't checked it out yet, go to thedogland.com. The title of the story is How a Reduced Salary Cap in 2021 Impacts the Browns. Yeah, Jack, he's very detailed in his articles, and if you need to know like what the cap could look like if it does drop as significant as they're talking, like Jack covers it all right there. And he also wrote a great piece on offensive tackles that were first round picks in the last decade. If anybody wants to, think about what Jedrick Wills will do in year 1, and you need to look at some history of first round offensive tackles, Jack's got it covered in another great article he did there. Jack, anything else Browns or NFL related you want to chat?
Just on those 2 articles, obviously people moan at me on Twitter that, it's always negative. It's always warnings about this, warnings about that. Both of these 2 pieces are really positive. There is a lot of great stuff going on. The Browns are in a good position. The one thing that I'm really keen and can't wait to find out is what is Myles Garrett's contract? We're at it feels like 2 weeks since the deal was announced. We still have no idea what his contract structure is. We've got some ideas about the guarantees, the 2 option bonuses, but none of the numbers yet. So I can't wait for them to come out, because that's the next thing I'm really excited about. Working on a big piece, so that's going to be a few weeks away. I'm looking at all the free agents for at least the last 3 years. No, sorry, at least the last 4 to 5 years, just to see where that sort of annual sort of pool of talent. I've got a feeling safety's going to be there. I don't feel there's going to be many other positions there, but I just want to know, is there sort of a one position where you can get a top 25% player every single year? And if so, where is it? And that's going to be really interesting to find out.
Yeah, definitely. Let me ask you, do you go to Over the Cap when you wake up first thing in the morning just to see if the Miles contract's on there?
I haven't been doing it in the mornings, but I do it in the early, sort of before lunchtime. I do have a check-in at random times of the day. I just think, I'm literally walking from the living room to the bathroom. Shall I check if the deal's out?
I check it every day too. Like, honestly, I'm checking it. I'm like, as soon as I see it, I'm sending it to you. Like, you better be ready for it.
I can't wait. I'll clear out some time. If it comes on Thursday and Friday, my parents are visiting, so I won't be doing an article then, but I'll get it to you at Sunday.
Oh, no, you're good. You're good, buddy. As for my writing, I think I'm going to try to take a stab at a projected 53-man roster this week, so definitely check that out on thedogland.com. Guys, follow Jack on Twitter at Jack Duffin. You know, you guys want to give him a hard time and say he's Mr. Negative, but he's educating the masses. He's teaching you all about salary cap, analytics, like all that. Like, he's not trying to be the Debbie Downer of the Browns fan base. He's trying to educate people. So definitely give him a follow. Check out his work at thedogland.com. Listen to his other podcast with Paul Brown and Ian Right, as Paul says it. They do a great job. If you guys listen to this podcast, follow us on Spotify, subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, follow me at Jack McCurry08. Anthony's coming back soon, guys. So hopefully sometime this week we sit down and talk some Browns. But until next time, go Browns.
Go Browns.